I am a podcast junkie. I enjoy all types of content. One of my favorite podcasters is Brene Brown. Yeah. Brene is a researcher, and she's also a New York Times best-selling author. One of the things that Brene has studied for years is courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy in how one leads. My goal for the next few minutes is to challenge the status quo on how leaders lead. You see, vulnerability among leaders is the root of authentic leadership and meaningful connections. It is the ability to express and expose through word and deed who we really are and what we generally think and feel. You see, we have been taught for so long not to show our scars. But I believe that the best leaders are vulnerable because vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, trust, engagement, and some may say creativity. It was the incarceration of my children's father that led me on a path of parenting through fear and shame. Being a single parent wasn't necessarily in my cards, but parenting through incarceration definitely was not the hand I wanted to play. My sons, who are now 26 and 24 years old, they taught me a very valuable lesson as a parent, to be brave and to be vulnerable. I had no clue that they were teaching me these very valuable lessons. But one of the things I learned most about that was that I had to effectively lead myself first before I was able to lead other people. You see, it was a season in my life when I disappeared in plain sight. I told myself and my friends that I was disappearing because I was focused on parenting two little boys who was grieving the absence of their dad because of incarceration. I was, and I am, a mama bear. But the mama bear began to shrink into a cub. I remember the exact moment when he was sentenced to 14 years in a federal prison. And I remember walking in to the office of Dr. Fred Allen, who was the national director of SBC 21 at the time. And he gave me an assignment. He said, I've been thinking about how we can help equip local pastors and leaders around the very tragic thing that's happening in Black and brown communities with the incarceration of men and women. And so I want to start a national program that will effectively equip pastors and leaders on how to transform their communities to end mass incarceration. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, wow, does he really know the hole that's in my heart right now? Does he really know that I have been shattered in a million pieces? He had no clue of what me and my family were walking towards. So I convened a meeting with pastors and leaders and community persons and impacted persons in incarceration. And I was sitting around the table preparing to plan the National Prison Summit on Mass Incarceration. And they were sharing their testimonies. They were sharing the things that they were impacted with. And I was listening to story after story after story. And I was silent, taking notes, preparing to do what this planning team has done here, prepare an excellent meeting, make sure that the experience was great and that the people were doing what they needed to do. But then I heard a voice. You hypocrite. I brought you to this table, and I intend to use you at this table. Now show your scar. I heard it, but I ignored it. So one day, I ignored it and walked. Now, it wasn't me, but I did hear you, God. So one day, I'm called to the school. The boys are in the 7th and 8th grade. They're attending a small Catholic school in Dallas, Texas, and they had been in a fight. Their very first fight, 7th and 8th grade. I got to the school. They were in a fight because one of the kids said some nasty things about what would happen to their dad when he was in prison. And what I didn't realize was the very public court trial that my family had endured, and that people knew what was going on in our house. And school wasn't so great for the kids. So I go to the classroom, to the principal's office with the boys, and I begin to just go in on them about fighting in school. And then my 7th grader went in on me. He said, "You are walking around here, and we hear you crying at night. We see the pain that you're in, but when we get to church and we get around people, you act like nothing is going on." Yeah, I had just been ousted by a 7th grader. I'm like a middle schooler, just put his mama on watch. I was too wrapped up in fear and in shame to realize the trauma that was happening in my own family. And I said to my 7th grader, "Okay, I've been participating in the cover-up. I guess I actually do need to lead myself well. I need to express and expose in word and in deed who we really are and what I really feel about what's going on in our family." They needed me to face what was facing me. They needed me to be vulnerable in the moment, and they needed me to parent from a place and journey towards a place of leading myself well. You know, it wasn't the only time that we have seen vulnerability in my life and maybe in your life. But you know, being exposed and authentic is scary. It's scary because we're wondering if we share, if you will use it against me. Well, I believe that whether you do or not, we must be sold out to the transformation of our community, our families, and our workplace. We have to be sold out to the idea that vulnerable leadership is what transforms communities. You know, vulnerability is also in the Bible. It's the 11th chapter of John when Jesus goes to Lazarus to see his friend. Martha and Mary had told him that Lazarus had died. And he got there with his posse and he said, "Roll the stone away. I need to see my friend." And Jesus got to Lazarus and he wept. And he cried. Jesus was vulnerable. Who told you that crying was a sign of weaknesses? Better yet, who told you that letting others see you cry is a sign of weakness? Not only does it show authenticity, but it shows love. Jesus loved Lazarus. But in this moment of grief, Jesus also led. If Jesus can show vulnerability, friends, I believe that we should use our experiences to teach others how to be vulnerable and how to lead. It was a year ago to this date that my best friend and ministry partner showed us how to be vulnerable leaders. You see, after the late Junius Dotson learned of his terminal pancreatic cancer diagnosis, God allowed me to witness authentic, healthy, and vulnerable leadership. He was intent on making sure that his family, his friends, the hundreds of colleagues that he led in discipleship ministries, and the thousands and thousands of colleagues in our connection, he was intended to allow us to see his scars and for us to know that God could be trusted. He dedicated daily time to letting others know through meaningful connections and vulnerable conversations and honesty about what was important, showing his scars. And the honesty of what was most important. Junius showed up. He taught us how to push past our fears and promises of what God was saying to us. And I'm standing before you today because of his teachings. Because he showed up, I had to show up today. I had to show up for D'Angelo and Adam. I had to show up for my friends and colleagues. I have to show up and show my scars. Contrary to popular belief, Brene teaches that vulnerability is not winning or losing, but it's having the courage to show up, even when you cannot control the outcome. Like Jesus wept for Lazarus, I still grieve and weep for Junius at this very moment, but I am so grateful that he demonstrated to all of us how to lead while bleeding. Brene says you either walk inside your story and own it, or you walk outside of your story and you hustle for its worthiness. Leaders, your story matters. Your scars matters. Now lead with authenticity and with love and with courage and with empathy, and let them see you sweat. Thank you so much for listening.